Oh, this is interesting. I pulled in from work yesterday and I see this little apple branch was hanging like that. I knew that wasn't right. So I come over to take a look, and sure enough it had snapped off. So I put a nice clean cut on it, you know, make it nice. Trying to figure out what took that branch off of there, or how that happened. And my neighbor comes pulling in. And he says, oh yeah, he says, a couple days ago I seen a bunch of black bears hanging out here in your yard. He goes, I'm wondering, maybe one of the black bears pulled that branch off. And I figured that probably was it. So that's not a big deal. It's just a small branch. We cut it off nice and clean. We fix that up a little bit. But then I got poking around and I noticed this. And this is a little more concerning. Apparently, our friend the black bear decided to rip up the bark on my apple tree. And you can see it's all busted up here and torn. There's a little more, you probably can't see it, but it's more up here. There's a little more up in here that's been ripped out. And that is concerning, because this is not a little branch. This is a major branch on this tree, and I don't want to lose it. When you see things like this, you know, you have a couple of concerns here. One is that your vascular system, your phloem specifically, is going to be damaged. The phloem is the part that carries all the photosynthesized nutrients, the sugars and carbohydrates from the leaves, back down the tree and into the roots. And that phloem is just behind your bark, and we've obviously lost some of that in here. Quite a bit, actually. It is concerning. And then the other concern is infection. Open wounds like this are going to be prone to infection. Fungal and bacterial issues. You want to think about moisture getting in here and causing rot, and ultimately that's what destroys often these big old majestic apple trees, is just rot. So in a situation like this, you want to deal with this right away. Now fortunately this just happened, and we haven't had any rain. It's been very dry. And rain is your number one enemy on these things. Water gets into these cracks and these little fissures, and it gets stuck behind the bark in here. You know, you get water in there and it just sits in there. And that's what's going to start that rotting process. So what we're going to do is we're going to try to clean this up. I'm going to try to save this branch, and I think we can. But we're going to clean up these wounds, and we want to create a situation where it's really not capable of holding water. I want to make this so that when it does get wet, because it will, I want to make sure that water has the ability to come out of it, and it can actually just stay dry. That's the number one thing that you want. And then as far as infection goes, we're going to do a few things in here, because trees do have the ability to fight off infection. What they will do is they'll build a wall, a barrier where that open wound is, and that barrier will keep infections from getting in. We call it compartmentalization. That's what it's called in the tree world. But sometimes when you get these bigger, nastier wounds, it can take a little bit of time for the tree to really compartmentalize that thing solidly. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of help it along a little bit to make sure that we keep any infections, bacterial or fungal, out of here until the tree can compartmentalize the thing on its own, and then it should be able to sustain itself. And here's the problem. It's going to rain out all day tomorrow. And when you're dealing with bacterial or fungal infections, rain is your number one enemy. Usually that's when the stuff's going to spread, splashing water, it's going to get moist. That's when your bacterial is going to get in there. So I want to jump on this right now tonight. I want to get this cleaned up, set up, and protected, so that when it does rain tomorrow, hopefully we won't get any infections in there. And we're going to try to get this, do what we can to try to save this branch. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look around at all these loose pieces of bark in here that have the potential to hold water. These are nasty, they're all ripped apart, and we want to get a nice clean cut on these. You want them to be nice and clean all the way around, so that when it does rain out, the water just kind of runs off and doesn't get stuck behind these little bits and pieces. So that's what we're going to do. The first thing we're going to do is just get this wound cleaned up. So to try to make nice clean cuts on this, what I find works really well is just, you know, a good sturdy pocket knife and a hammer, believe it or not. Trying to just cut this with the knife is hard because the bark is tough. And what I find is quite often you'll be pushing on the knife and trying to go, and it'll slip. And not only is that dangerous, but you end up like slipping into the bark and cutting where you don't want to. And I've found over the years that if you got a good stiff knife and a hammer, you can kind of get in here. You might want to come up here. You can get up in here and figure out where you want to make that nice clean cut. And if you put your knife on there and just give it a couple of taps, just gently, you don't want to cut into the living wood, but it gives you much better control over the cuts that you're making. The knife's not going to slip and slide all over the place on you. And as you can imagine, this is a bit tedious, but it does work pretty darn well. And then hopefully you can get underneath here and just very gently get this out of here. Sometimes you got to play with these a little bit, but as you can see, when you do this, you tend to get a nice clean edge on there, and that's kind of what you're looking for. And then we're gonna just kind of follow this around here until we go around the whole thing. And try to get this back to good solid bark. This is going to take me a bit of time to get this done. So that's the beautiful thing about editing. I'm not going to make you sit here and watch me go through this whole process, but you got the idea, and I'll show you where I'm at once I get this done. Alright, so we cleaned this all up, and as you can see, what we basically tried to do was make nice clean cuts on here. Okay, so that there's no places for the water to kind of get in there. Oh, and here comes my neighbor running his tractor, of course. I hope you guys can hear me. So what we've done is we cut all this back real nice clean cuts, so that if any water gets on here, hopefully it'll run right down here, and I've almost kind of given it a place right here where it can come out. We don't want water to sit in here as best we can. And now what we're going to do, and I did the same with these up here too, I cleaned them up, carved them up. This little strip of bark I'm leaving, I'm hoping that will live, graft, so that we get some more vascular system in there. And now what we want to do is we just want to clean it. For right now, I'm just using peroxide, hydrogen peroxide in a little spray bottle. A little hydrogen peroxide to kind of sterilize it. In case there's any germs that are in here, we want to clean those up good. This way, if there's any germs that got in here, we want to make sure that we try to kill most of those off. Again, infection is always the primary concern in a situation like this. Infection and water retention. So those are the two things that we're trying to alleviate. Now, hydrogen peroxide will it'll kill off a lot of, you know, any bacteria or fungus that might have gotten in there already. So basically we're just kind of sterilizing it. But peroxide is not going to give you any long-term control. It's not going to keep bacteria from getting in there. You know, what we want to do is we want to create an environment where we're going to protect this from bacterial infection long enough until the tree can fully compartmentalize itself. And so the peroxide will clean it, get it sterilized. We're going to let this dry maybe half an hour, that's all. And then we're going to hit it with some liquid copper. Alright, so we waited a few minutes. We let this peroxide kind of soak in and dry, do its thing, kill any germs that are in there. And then what I like to use is simply copper. And I love these these are ready to use, they're already mixed. I usually keep one of these in my truck all the time, in case I run into one of these if I'm on a job, a situation like this. Copper is what I prefer to use because not only is copper a fungicide, but it's also a bactericide. Most of your fungicides out there are not bactericides at all. So this way we'll get some protection from bacteria and fungus in one shot. And again, like the peroxide, we're just going to spray up real good here. Any of these open wounds, try to get it up into those those fresh cuts. And I'm usually pretty liberal with it. I like to soak it down real good. And that will give us like a chemical control to help keep any fungus or bacteria out of there. The final step, the next step I'm going to do is we're going to put a little protection on there. We're not going to paint it. You don't want to paint open wounds. You don't want to use things like roofing tar. You don't want to use latex paint. Most of that, anything that's going to put a layer on here, you don't want to use, because inevitably what's going to happen is that stuff's going to crack. It's inevitable. It's going to crack. You're going to get little fissures in there. Moisture is going to get in behind that paint, behind those sealants, or behind that roofing tar, or whatever people use. And when it does get behind it, you've just created the very environment that you want to avoid. Okay, you've just created a situation where water can get trapped in behind that stuff, and that's the last thing that you want. So I like to just keep them open, let them get sunlight, let them get fresh air, let them stay dry. And if they're dry, they're not going to rot. Or chances are they won't rot. You're going to reduce the opportunity for them to rot substantially, because water is what's going to make your branches rot. So the copper will create a nice little chemical barrier. And then once this dries, again, we'll just wait another 20 minutes or so. And then I'll show you what I am going to use, what I do like to use in situations like this, that can repel water, but it's not going to actually put a layer on there that water can get stuck behind. All right, now that we've had the copper on there, that's had some time to dry. What I like to use now is this, Howard's Feeding Wax. Okay, what this will do, it's got carnauba wax and beeswax and some orange peel in it and some mineral oil. And what this will do is it will help to repel water off of this thing. It will put a thin coating of a thin waxy coating on here, but it's not going to be so much that water can get trapped behind it. So it's more of just a repellent than it is a physical barrier. And I just use a cheap little paintbrush, slap a little bit of this stuff on there. And again, just try to coat it up real good, and then wipe off any excess. And this will help to repel water without locking water in. And here comes my neighbor again. Okay, so we'll just go around here and hit some of these spots up real good. And once I get it slathered on there pretty good, I'll wipe off any excess. And that's about it. You know, it's a little bit tedious to do this. It takes a little bit of time, but I would much rather do this than 5 years from now have this limb rot off and fall off, because this is like 1/3 of my tree, and it would be a shame to see this thing go. Alright, so that should do it. Now this isn't something I'm going to come out and do, you know, once a week or anything like that. Like I said, the idea is to just keep it as clean and dry as you can, so that the tree has plenty of time to compartmentalize itself, and then it can kind of defend itself against bacteria and infection. I will keep an eye on it. I might, you know, who knows, maybe in 2 weeks or 3 weeks I might come in here and just spray a little copper on that wound again, just to buy it a little more time. And I'll keep an eye on it, but for the most part, this should pretty well be it. You know, this should create an environment where hopefully this tree can just heal itself, and hopefully this limb lives, and if it rains out all day tomorrow like it's supposed to, I can relax and not have to worry about it.